So what happened?
So I get back from that deployment. That's the summer of 2000. And shortly after that, I got selected by my commanding officer to go to Top Gun. So that was my first exposure to kind of advancing inside the squadron. So as a young guy, I'd done almost 2 years in the squadron. I've been there for a little while and got some qualifications and grew and developed in the squadron. And they pick 1 or 2 guys every couple of years from each squadron to go to the school. And the whole point of going there is that you learn kind of this advanced, it's like a master's degree basically in being a fighter pilot, with the intent that you can bring that back to the squadron and be one of the kind of key trainers, the key leaders in the squadron. So I went to Top Gun early the next year, actually about a year later, so summer of 2001, I go to Top Gun and I came back. And we were just in a workup cycle.
When you show up to Top Gun, just so everybody knows, you feel like, I mean, especially because you were the big combat vet with bombs dropped, and you feel like you're pretty much a complete stud.
Yeah.
And then you show up at Top Gun, and the instructors just can completely annihilate. And it just, for those of you who don't know, it's you're learning how to dogfight mano a mano against another guy in another plane, like stock car racing, because the planes are equal, and it's you against the other guy. And it was actually cool. You were explaining some of the rules and how you'd set it up, and they have, how in jiu-jitsu, you start standing, you shake hands, bump fists. Okay, now it's on. Well, with the Top Gun, they start at a certain distance. They go towards each other at a certain altitude, certain distance away from each other. They pass at 1,000 feet, left wing to left wing. And then once they pass, they say, what do you say? Game on?
Fights on.
Fights on. Fights on. And then boom, now it's go. Yeah. So that's how they start in their neutral position. And of course, when you show up there, it's just like jiu-jitsu in the fact that it's like a guy that did a little bit of training somewhere, and then they show up at a jiu-jitsu place, and they're going to get totally destroyed. So he shows up, you show up at this thing, and you think you're, again, a big combat vet, you just get annihilated.
Totally. So, yeah, I get that. I had dropped a bomb. That's singular. I had dropped a bomb. And I was that was a big deal. That dude had dropped a bomb, and so at the time I thought,
because some of the instructors had never done that before, right?
Most of them, like you said, there's the dryers. There just wasn't a ton going on. You had a story here and there, but I think more than anything in my own mind, you kind of build up like, I got some game here, man. I'm gonna watch this. I'm gonna do some good work here. And I'd done well enough in my squadron, and I was one of the guys that got picked to go to school.
Which is another little confidence boost.
Yeah, it is.
So your ego's getting fed. It's getting force fed.
Maybe, a little bit. You're feeling pretty good about yourself, and so you go up there, and like you said, so you're a student, and you're not gonna be as good as the instructors. But what you don't know is that you're not just gonna lose. You're not just gonna lose or get annihilated. You're not even gonna know what happened. It's gonna be over, and you're gonna kind of be flying back, and before you're gonna land, and you're not gonna be able to explain what just occurred. I mean, it occurs in a way that is it's hard to explain. It's like you weren't there. It's humbling. I mean, Jocko, we're talking the very first flight on the very first day, my very first event, the very first fight of the first flight. It was over in like 20 seconds, and the instructor was saying, okay, they say knock it off when we're done. We're going to start and set it up again. And I knew right then I was totally in over my head. The very first one. And it was my first flight was so bad that when I landed, we're walking back in you go to maintenance, and you basically go back and turn the airplane back in, and so they can fix it. And then what you're supposed to do is walk across the street to the squadron hangar and talk about it. And I'm in my gear, and you're supposed to get undressed out of your flight gear and go. He's like, hey, man, don't get undressed. And I'm like, okay, right on. He's like, why don't we just go do that again? It was bad enough that we didn't even need to talk about it. We just needed hey, and he's like, hey, why don't you just take a deep breath, man? And we went and did that flight without ever even talking about the first one.
Right.
So I kind of knew I had some work to do. So Top Gun is really good about not just humbling you, but obviously it teaches you a ton. It's a 6, at the time it was only 6 weeks for the Marines, because we didn't do some of the syllabus that the Navy did because we got it elsewhere. And it's 6 weeks where you start with literally just you against another guy, 1 against 1, and you end up building up to where it's 6 to 8 of you on the blue side, the friendly side, against 15, 20 simulated adversaries. So it's a lot in a short period of time, and that idea of being like really bad when you start happens over and over again in the course. So you get to the 1v1 phase, and at the end you're like, oh, finally I got this 1v1 thing. I got this thing wired. I can do this. I'm like, all right, cool. And you're not going to go 2 against whatever, and you just get rolled again. And you're like, back to square one. So it builds you up, it breaks you down, it builds you up. Standard military,
Right.
Just breaks you down to your pieces. And then the guys there that are instructors they're obviously really good. I mean, that part sort of speaks for itself. They're really good on the airplane. But what makes them unique is that they're exceptional teachers. So you learn a ton. So by the time you finish Top Gun, that image in the mirror when you're like, man, that dude was awesome, they get shattered. It's actually all back together by the time you leave. And so you leave there like, you got that patch on your shoulder. You fly back, you get the patch, and the last day you get up in your airplane, F-18, with my name painted on the side with a Top Gun patch, and I flew back to Miramar. I'm like, so
the dream is getting better.
The dream is getting better. But there's been enough reminders like, I should probably maybe cool out a little bit. You start to just learn that there's always guys out there that are significantly better than you, and you keep climbing up the hill. But finishing Top Gun as a student, you feel like you've hit the top of the mountain, but you realize, because the guys you've been working with, there's an awful long way to go.
You at least know what you don't know.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. You know what you don't know, and there's a lot that you don't know. And so it kind of dispels all those feelings. We went through flight school. Like, wow, I finished flight school and I got F-18s. I've really got this flying thing nailed. And you're barely functional in an airplane compared to these other guys. And when you get to a place like Top Gun, it's just such a concentration of talent. You as good as it feels, the thing you get the most out of is some humility, because you just got crushed for 6 weeks, crushed. And hopefully you learn something out of it. And you're supposed to take that back and teach the guys in your squadron all those same lessons. And so my expectation was I was going to go back from Top Gun. I was going to spend another 2 years, 18 months in the squadron as kind of the senior instructors, and then go on to something else. And I didn't know exactly what that was at the time. But as I'm leaving, no joke, my last day, I remember the guy who asked me, it's actually the same guy that's going to do my retirement here in a couple of months. He's like, hey, man, have you thought about coming back to be an instructor at Top Gun after this tour and your squadron's over? And I try to play it cool, like, let me go home and think about that. But clearly there wasn't a lot to think about there. So I left there with kind of an inclination that I might get asked back, and I was pretty stoked about that. They didn't formalize it, but he was a senior IP on the staff, a senior Marine there as well, a real respected guy in Marine aviation, and he had given me a sit down. So I was hoping that was going to happen. But I also thought I had time. I thought I was, this is July 2001, and obviously, 6 weeks later, 9/11 hits. And so all that calculus kind of changed, and very quickly my squadron, which was on this regular cycle of preparing to go to what was going to be another Southern Watch deployment, just like we did, that whole thing had changed because of September 11th.